also
You know what?
announce
Just
it
to get
again.
this thing out of here, I'm gonna do this.
Let me announce it. And okay. Okay, let me. Somehow I closed my chat, so I have to reopen real quick. Okay. Perfect. Okay. Okay. Okay, let me sit into my original position here. Ladies and gentlemen, please let us know if we can start, if our sound and video quality is good. Let me know, and as always, you will be able to ask questions at the end of the interview. Hölgyek, urak, a végén tudtok majd kérdezni, és ha bármilyen kérdésetek van, akkor nyugodtan tegyétek fel majd a végén, és tudassátok velem, ha tudunk kezdeni. Please let me know if we can start. Let me check if I announced it, because... Oh, yeah, okay. Okay. Kezdhetünk, Gergovics? Let me know, let me know. People are sleepyhead around this time at my place. I know it's late,
Sure.
but please speak up. Please.
They are starting to do work outside, so I apologize for the background noise. I don't know, with my headphones on, it's probably good that we put my headphones on.
It cannot be heard, so you are good. And
Oh,
even
okay.
if there would be, I don't think that's that big of an issue. So kezdhetünk, Gergovics? Please let me know if we can start. We started a bit earlier, so please let me know. Let me know if we can start. Hölgyek, urak, kezdhetünk? Kezdhetünk. Let me know. Let me know. Kezdhetünk, hölgyek, urak? Let me adjust my mic as well. You can hear me well, right?
I can hear you great, yeah.
Perfect, okay. Jó a minőség, hölgyek, urak? Okay, let me check because no one responded yet. I hope that they can hear me. Responded. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay. Okay, perfect. Okay, so let me know if we can start. Right down. Let me know. Oh, I'm asking you, by the way, Tim. Sorry.
Oh, yes, sorry.
Yeah.
Yes,
No,
we should absolutely start. I thought you were asking your
No. Thank you.
Yep,
okay.
I'm happy to start.
Nice. Okay, so welcome everyone at the very new episode of my Dev Live show. I'm here today joined with Tim Carter, who is most known the story of Sleeping Dogs. He has written the story of Sleeping Dogs, but he also was a producer for Mortal Kombat Legacy and also worked a lot of video game stories. And I'm very thankful and very honored that you joined us today for this episode of my Dev Live show. And like I'm always saying, let's start with a little bit of introduction. So please introduce yourself for us.
Sure, and listen, thanks very much for inviting me. It's an honor to be here. So yes, my name is Tim Carter, and I am both a film and game producer and a writer of movies, novels, and video games. So for you, I think the most important elements are about 20 years that I've spent as a writer of one kind or another in video games. Before that, I was a huge fan. My professional experience with video games goes back. Probably most of your viewers are not old enough to know, but I was a writer for a magazine called Computer Gaming World in 1990. That was the beginning of my career in video games, back when print magazines were actually the sort of biggest medium for discussing them. That was at the very beginning of the video game industry. But most relevant here is I came on and began working on video games around 2007, 2008
I see.
in Vancouver, which is where I had just returned to Vancouver from Los Angeles, where I was working in film and television. There was a writer's strike, and I came back to Vancouver and began working on games, first on Mod Nation Racer, and then
Oh,
I
nice.
moved.
Okay, I didn't know
Yes,
that.
oh yeah, well, only a small amount, and I often don't say that because the writing there was really excellent, and most of it wasn't me. But and there's a funny story behind it. But some of the writing at the very end, and a lot of the revisions were done by me at the last minute.
I see.
But I can't take credit for the really excellent quality humor that somebody else, I think it was a two-man team, did. Uh, but that was with United Front Games, and they were simultaneously working on what became Sleeping Dogs. I think it was called True Crime Hong
True
Kong at
crime.
the time,
Yeah, Hong Kong, or
and
at third place of true crime series. Yeah.
yeah, and of course, famously, that game got canceled by Activision and then rebooted by Square Enix. And when it got rebooted, I had just finished making a movie in California and literally come back to Vancouver maybe a week before. And so they just called me up and said, "Look, can you, we need someone right away. We have a very limited time window and quite a limited budget for the size of game it was. And we need someone who can come in, solve problems, and just carry this thing over the goal line." And so that was my first big video game writing job. And since then, I've worked on maybe 10 or 15 big AAA console titles, as well as many small ones. I many times I'm not the only writer. Often these things are done in, sort of someone will come in and
I
then
see.
leave, and someone else will come in. But I worked on Need for Speed,
Okay.
Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell,
Okay.
Gears of War, the sequel to Sleeping Dogs, which of course never came out. I think it's okay to say now an unpublished sequel to Legacy of Kain, which we did an enormous amount of work on before the publisher pulled the plug on that, as well as a couple of titles that are still, like, they probably will come out one day for Microsoft at the Coalition. So I really can't speak to them too much because they're still sort of top secret. And then moving all the way up to today, I just finished writing a game for a new company called T Minus Zero, which is
Okay.
based in Austin. And now I'm starting with a small indie studio in Vancouver called Brass Token, which is almost completely former Sleeping Dog devs.
Okay.
So
Nice. 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 Okay. So, first question of mine would be, what was your very first contact with like video games as a player, and also like writing stories, as a hobby of yours? If you could speak
sure.
about
Well,
those.
my very first contact goes again all the way back to the very foundation of video games. I lived in a
Okay.
small rural community on an island called Vancouver Island off the coast of Canada, and I loved board games, board war games
I see.
especially. This is like the mid 1980s, the early 1980s, and it was impossible to find opponents or I had to play against myself most of the time. And so when the Apple II Plus came out, the ability to play on a computer and have the computer either moderate it so that you could play against other people, but they didn't have to be in the same room as you, or to have AI was like a revelation. And so I was a fan right from the very, very beginning of the industry. As I said, when I was in graduate school, I was studying strategy, and so it was a natural for me to write about strategy games,
I
which
see.
I did for Computer Gaming World for many years. And I'm actually still friends and still play both tabletop games and PC games with some of the key kind of people behind that magazine. And so, I was just a long time fan. And then when I went into film and television, I was sort of obviously honing my skills as a screenwriter, as a creator of characters and story. So there was a natural fit between being a fan of games, writing, creative writing, and then being in Vancouver, which to this day, but especially back in sort of 2008, was a massive hub of game development.
I see.
Activision had a studio, EA had multiple studios here, United Front Games was very big, and there was a host of indie studios that had been created by people who had worked at those big corporations and then had kind of created their own outfits out of it. So I had a certain skill set plus a fandom, and just had been there since the inception, and that made it good for me to come in and be able to understand what they needed.
I see. I see. And were you like always wanting to write stories for video games? Like, was that something that you were always like wanting to make as a dream job for yourself from a young age?
Yeah, well, so when I was young, there were no video games, but I always wanted to tell stories. I wanted to be a novelist. And then as I got older, and again, I was living in Vancouver, the film industry had really taken off here. So there were a lot of TV shows and
I see.
movies being
I
made
see.
in Vancouver. And I thought that would be a good way to sort of to it would open doors for me, the
I
fact that
see.
they were
I
being
see.
made in Vancouver. It turned out that I had to move to Los Angeles to get anything done at all, but I didn't know that at the time. And so as games became more narratively sort of interesting and complex, it was a natural sort of drift for me to take the skills I had and go to video games. So
I
yeah, I
see.
mean, in a way, I think from the beginning of narrative games, I wanted to be a part of that.
I see. I see. That makes sense totally. Okay, and so a more personal question would be of mine. So, how do you feel? Were your family and close friends supportive about this decision of yours that you want to combine your two greatest passion of your life, like video games and story writing, storytelling? How do you feel about that?
Well, my family are very supportive people, and so I think I could have told them I wanted to do anything and they would
Okay.
have been supportive of it. But I think most professional writers will tell you that unless their parents were writers, nobody in their family understands what they do, how they make a living, or the sort of inevitable ebb and flow that comes with a creative career.
I
So,
see.
I think my parents and then later my wife were always a little apprehensive that I would be able to support myself. And frankly, I'm sometimes apprehensive that I'll be able to support myself. In movies in particular is really difficult.
I
And,
see.
I've had some success in that industry, but you can go years making literally nothing. And then when you get a movie into production, you get paid very well, but you need to stretch that out for, you can't be sure that the next one will come
True.
immediately
True.
afterwards. I was fortunate for a while to have what's called an overhead deal with Legendary Pictures, where they pay you per month as a kind of advance payment against work
I
you're
see.
going to do for them
I see.
later. Uh, so that was the only time in my adult professional life as a creative writer where I kind of knew that next month there was a check going to show up.
I see.
Uh, and that was, I think we did that for 4 or 5 years, but out of 25 years or something, you know. But everyone has been supportive, and I think at some point, I'm 56 now, so I've managed to keep my head above water for a good 30 years or more, and so I think I have a certain amount of confidence, and so does my family that things will work out just because they have before.
I see. I see. Have you always had this mentality with your confidence, by the way, that you're really up for your dreams to chase them from a
Yeah,
very
I
young age when you wanted to start this career of yours?
I always wanted to be a writer, and I always, at the beginning, as a kid, I wanted to be a novelist,
I
right?
see.
And I think, the entire genre of fantasy writers read Tolkien and wanted to write more, right? I think that's, everyone wanted to keep the Lord of the Rings going or do their version
True.
of
True.
it.
True. True. True.
And so I was one of those kids, right? Like that was my way in emotionally. Um, and when I first graduated university, I thought maybe I would become a professor and write academic work. So I was going to write, but it would be much more dry. And then it's a long story, but I chose not to go down that road. And I worked in corporate writing for a while, like maybe 5 or 6 years. I was the managing editor of a magazine. I wrote corporate reports. So I was writing things, but honestly, and it was a really well-paying job, and the people I worked with were lovely, but it wasn't very exciting creatively. And
Creatively,
so,
yeah.
yeah, I came to a kind of a fork in the road where the magazine I was working on was shutting down, and they had given us a really nice sort of severance package, and I had an opportunity. I sort of knew if I was going to go into creative writing, it had to be now. I wasn't married, I didn't have a mortgage, I could afford to sort of live on the borderline of poverty if I had to. Um, and so I made the jump, then, and that was like 2002, I think.
I see.
So,
I see.
uh, and I've managed ever since. So,
I see. Was it, by the way, a bit of scary for you to go deeper into like writing stories and really like go up for the things that you always like wanted to do in your life?
Absolutely. And it's, I think I'm not naturally, there's a part of me that very much wants to sort of, leap before I look,
I
but
see.
there's a
I
part of
see.
me that's very conservative too. And so, I have a business partner on the producing side, and if he hadn't pulled me to Hollywood, I probably wouldn't have had the courage to, uproot everything. I didn't know anybody in Los Angeles. As a Canadian, I didn't even have
I
a
see.
work permit. I just you can go as a producer legally, it's fine, but as a writer, you
Sorry.
you can't. So I sort of was fudging that line a little bit, and at various times, even in gaming, and even now, it can be a little intimidating because you don't know where the next job is coming from. Sometimes contracts are quite short, or frankly, games get canceled. I've
True.
been
True.
I've
True.
worked on at least three really big games where I had a really prominent role. I was very well paid. It looked like it was going to last 4 or 5 years. I felt very comfortable and confident, and I loved the team I was working with. And all three got canceled.
Was that a
By
very sad
different.
feeling, by the way, to see those games
Yes,
being cancelled?
yes, very much so. The sequel to Sleeping Dogs, I think everyone that worked on that felt like it was going to be a really good game. Uh, and and so it was really disappointing for that to get canceled. And then I did work on this other one for Microsoft that I can't really talk much about what the creative was, but I thought there was really the potential for something great there. And they didn't cancel it, but they put it on hold to the point where who knows, whether it will ever come out or not. So yes, it can be heartbreaking, especially if it's something that, is a sequel to a successful game. In the case of Sleeping Dogs, we felt like I think the whole team felt like we had done really well with what we had, with the crazy sort of situation of it being canceled and then rebooted, and we had to make a lot of compromises just to get it out the door. And so the sequel, we were going to have a chance to build it from the ground up the way we wanted to, with the resources that we were going to have, and we were going to get to do it right. Uh, and so it was really sad to have that shot and then not, be able to take it all the way to fruition. Especially now, I worked in a lot of different things. I've published books. I have movies out. The most fan mail that I get is for Sleeping Dogs, and it's from people who wish there was more. And so
Yeah.
it's really disappointing to think, oh, there was more, and we just couldn't. We couldn't get it out the door.
Yeah. Do you think, by the way, in the future we could see like a sequel for Sleeping Dogs in any case?
People love. So I have no. This is purely my personal opinion. I have
Okay.
no inside information at all. But people love sequels. People love existing IP. I know that with Grand Theft Auto coming out, there are an awful lot of lists of like the really good open world crime games that are out there,
True.
and Sleeping Dogs is always somewhere in the top
True.
five.
True. True.
Uh,
True.
and so there's always hope, right? That
Yeah.
that they will reboot it and find a
Yeah, and
a
people
way in.
like
Whether
never forget, right? So we still remember
yeah,
that great game. So
yeah, I think so, and I think also the underlying like the challenge back then was a big open world crime game with all of the elements that they wanted to put into it, made it extremely expensive.
I
And
see.
so they somewhere there's an accountant that's just like, look, here's what we're gonna have to spend on it. Here's what we're gonna have to spend on marketing it. We don't think we're gonna have enough sales to for that to be
I see.
profitable.
I see.
Uh, if you were to do a different version of it, or if you were to use some of the newer tools that exist in game engines and take a different approach to it, you might get something that's as attractive to fans, but costs 20% of what the old one would have cost. And I'm not talking about AI or anything like that. I'm just talking about there's just newer and more interesting ways to build games these days. And some of the success I think isn't in these massive sprawling things with 1,000 features, and you
True.
can go do
True. True.
crafting, and you
True.
can go
Yeah.
like it's more they're more focused
True.
experiences.
True.
uh, and so I would guess, and again, I have no inside information, but that the numbers would work better for a different kind of Sleeping Dogs experience, and maybe that's where there's an opportunity.
I see. I see. Okay, so another personal question of mine would be like, how have you changed as a person in other territories of your life, as from being in the video game industry as a writer yourself? How do you feel about that?
Well, I think you have to keep evolving creatively,
Okay,
and so I hope that I have. And these days I am working on games. It's my principal. Right now, the film industry is in a period of contraction, and so while we are currently developing projects, I don't expect anything to take off in the next, like, let's say 6 months to a year. They're much more long-term plays at the moment, whereas I'm working on video games pretty much every day. As I said, I just finished one contract and immediately stepped into a new one. But I'm also working a lot on my fiction writing. So
I see.
taking the things that I've learned and trying to apply them to another medium is really challenging in a good way. It stretches you to to sort of step back and work on your skills as a writer. So, I think that's something that I'm very excited about. My first novella was like a modest success for something very small from a fiction writer no one had ever heard of. But I'm very hopeful about the novel, which will come out next year, and uh, that there might be a career there, a secondary career for me in the future. And then I think personally, just as you get older, I sort of feel like if you'd offered me any game in video games in 2008, I would have taken it. Just to be working in the industry, just to have a chance to write. And as time goes by, I think I've become a lot more sort of selective in terms of
I see.
who I want to work with, the kind of projects I want to work with. It's much more important to me to work with a team that's fun to work with, even if the game, it's not so much about the game creative as it is the quality of the creative team, and are they good people, and are they, is it rewarding every day to get up and go to work with them.
I see.
And that's something that definitely has evolved over time.
I see. It's very interesting that you were talking about your novel as well, which I read about in the past weeks, because I feel like you really like did not forget your very young age, your kid dreams of being a novelist, right? So that's why you are
Yeah.
always coming back to that, and I feel like we all do that as a human being, right? So when we have like a very at a very young age a dream, we always come back to that, even if we work in a totally different place or a field or a job, right? So do you feel like there would be a time for you in the future when you would like totally switch from video game industry and write stories for video games to being a novelist fully?
Well, so I think there's two parts to that. One is, could I support myself as a
I
novelist?
see, I
At the
see.
moment, I support myself very well writing video games, and I'm very well established. Like, not it's not that I'm sort of the most famous game writer out there, but if I reach out to a company looking for a job, or if
They know you,
I'm,
right? So
I
you have
yeah, that's right, and they'll know my work. Almost the way the video game industry works mostly is, people will work at a big company, then they'll switch to a new company, and then maybe they start their own indie shop at some point, or they go back to another
true,
company
true, true.
in a different
And the
role.
respect
And
carries over from one to another, right? So
that's right.
yeah,
So it's very unusual for me to start with a company like sort of cold, where I didn't
I
know
see.
someone. It's more often someone I worked with in the past calls me and says, "Hey, we need a writer. Are you available?" Like, that would be, I would say, 70 to 80% of my work
I see.
is the result of that sort of relationship. Um, and obviously in fiction, I'm starting from complete scratch. So I think it would be lovely. I think even if I was lucky enough to get a certain level of success writing novels, I'd probably still want to keep working in video gaming, except maybe with a little less sort of intensity,
I see.
simply because I love it, right?
I
And
see.
you really would need to be a very, very famous novelist to have as big an audience as I get if I'm working on a video game. And I think all writers, you want people to read your writing at the end of the day. That's
True,
the
true,
most
true. That's
important
the most
thing.
important thing, yeah.
Yeah. So if I drop in and do some writing on Gears of War or on another Sleeping Dogs or something, it's millions of people that are going
True,
to see
true.
it. And, boy, you really need to be a successful novelist to have anything approaching the size of that audience. So I think I would most likely, just for an emotional reasons, love to keep a foot in each. And they're so different as experiences that it there's something quite healthy and balancing about having a foot in each. The one sets off the other very nicely, as long as you're not finding yourself working, 18 hours a day or something crazy.
I see. I see. Okay. Did you find hard to, by the way, to find balance in your work time and also in with your family time and with your friends or other hobbies? How do you feel about that during all
The
those years that you worked and now too?
Yeah, the trick is that most creative work is surge work to some degree. So when I was producing movies, and often I was writing and producing the same movies. So both Dead Rising movies, for instance, I wrote them and produced them, and I'm the on-set producer. So I would be simultaneously rewriting the script, often to suit the demands of the
I
actors,
see.
and I would be on the set 14 hours a day, solving problems, dealing with very high stress sort of situations. And then we're making action movies which are stressful to begin with because if you make a mistake, people can really get hurt, right? So if you're doing
True.
car crashes or fights with weapons and things, you really have to be focused. And so when that happens, you simply the whole rest of your life gets put on hold. Really, I would see my wife for like 15 or 20 minutes when I woke up and 15 or 20 minutes when I went to
What's
bed.
not to that, right?
And yeah, the only good thing about that was because I was the producer, like the lead producer, I could invite friends and family to set in a
I
way
see.
that
I
people that
see.
work there would need my permission. And obviously, you're only going to bring so many
I see.
people,
I
but
see.
I would bring, my family to set all the time just because I wouldn't be able to see them otherwise. And it's true to less extent with video games. Like if you're not, if you're working with a good studio that doesn't sort of kind of go the way of crunch, right? Um, then it can be quite busy. Just because there's always deadlines, there's always milestones and things where you're rushing to do something. And then these days with remote work, often the time differences, as you and I discovered when we were trying to set up this
Yeah,
call,
exactly.
if I'm working with a European company or even a company on the East Coast of North America, I'm either working late into the evening or I'm starting
I
very
see.
early in the
So
morning.
it
And
really
so
messes up your
that,
time schedule, yeah, or
yeah,
time
yeah.
management, yeah.
So it's really sort of just trying to find a balance over the longer term. So
I
it's
see.
like if I'm really buried on a game, then I'll try to leave it so there's a few weeks before I start something else so that I can spend more time with friends, catch up on hobbies. I mean, the challenge is I find it really difficult these days to find the time to play games, which is A, it's one of my big hobbies, but B, like you need to be playing games if you're
True, true,
working in the
true.
gaming industry. Like you need to be current. I'm still just barely finishing the first chapter of Baldur's Gate, which I'm a huge RPG fan. I love that game. I think it's beautifully well executed. Normally I would have finished it ages ago, but I just haven't had the time to, and especially the time with those kind of games. A lot of the games I really love are the ones where you want to immerse yourself,
True,
but then you need to be playing like relatively big blocks of time, relatively
true,
close
true, true,
together.
true.
And I'll find like,
To
oh, okay, I
catch
got
up
a
with the
Sunday
story, right?
afternoon.
And not be
Yeah,
out of the story for long, yeah.
yes, yeah, those Bethesda games I think are I mean, I love them, but they're the worst because you drop back into like Elder Scrolls or Fallout or something, and you're like, what am I doing?
Yeah, I
There's
don't
like
remember what
400
happened. Yeah,
missions.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
where am I trying to go? And
Yeah.
Baldur's Gate is a little more focused in that, but I feel that way as well. And I'm like, I was playing just last night, and I'm like, what the hell potions are my characters carrying? I spent 20 minutes just rereading my inventory. So
Yeah.
these are the things that happen.
Yeah. And it's very interesting that you were talking about this because I remember an interview with like Amy Henning, who were the writer of Uncharted games, and she was
Sure.
telling pretty much the same as you told now that a lot of players these days, and also I have this mistake in my life. I did this mistake in my life as well that you mentioned as well. That sometimes we do not have that much time to finish a story game, right? And I remember the interview with her that she was telling about it, that she was very emotionally sad about a lot of players did not completed the story of Uncharted games, although they loved it, right? And Uncharted was also one of the best-selling games of all time, and it's very interesting to see, in my opinion, that all these authors and writers who write good and so great stories like you as well. Uh, those stories are not always played through by the players, right? So it's do
Hmm.
you feel like it can be sad for you as well to experience it? Is if, for example, there is a statistic that shows that people love your game but still like not experience the whole story of your game? How do you feel about that?
Oh, I think it's a big issue, and I think if you're a good writer, you need to keep that in mind.
I
So,
see.
for instance, when we were doing the sequel to Sleeping Dogs, we got all the metrics from the first one, right? Which would tell you when people fast forwarded through the cutscenes, which cutscenes they
I
watched,
hate that
you
if
know,
people do that. I hate that. I never
yeah.
understood why
But
people do that. Like,
it's a huge percentage, like something like 80 to 90% of people were fast forwarding through scenes. Now, some part of that is because they watched it once, they played, they died, they starting at the beginning of the mission
or
again.
they
Well,
do
why
not
watch it?
understand because they do not know the language that they are playing on, right?
Possibly, yes. I think, although localization, I think is pretty good these days. But yeah, it depends on the language for sure. Uh, but so some of that is just the nature of gameplay and the fact that you kind of repeat things. But still, it's an awful lot of people that are not paying attention. I think there's a kind of rule of thumb that I like to follow, which is so if you're writing a movie, the most important thing about a movie is the ending. People will put up with, now you can't bore them to the point where they'll turn off, and especially with Netflix, where these days it's very easy to switch, out, as opposed to when they're in a theater. It really has to be terrible for people to get up out of a theater and walk
And
away.
leave. Yeah,
So you kind
exactly.
of got them, right?
Yeah.
Uh, but if the ending is good, they'll remember the whole movie is good.
True,
I
true, true,
think
true.
the Blair Witch Project is a brilliant example of this. If anyone's a screenwriter and wants to see it in action, I watched the Blair Witch Project when it first came out. It scared the living daylights out of me. Um, and I came away from it thinking it was amazing. And then I rewatched it, and it's like the first three quarters of this movie is boring. But the last bit is really good and really scary. And so that's all you remember, right?
True, true,
So the
true.
movie, you're really trying to land the ending of it. With a book, it's easier for people to put it down. And so you need like cliffhangers at the end of every chapter, or you need something that pulls them through the whole experience. But you're expecting that all of your fans are going to get to the end, right? Like that's the goal, right? It's only if they hate it, they're
True,
not going
true,
to
true,
finish the
true.
book. But a video game, especially as a writer, and unless it's a really, really narratively heavy game like Last of Us or something like that, uh, where it's all about the story. But those are the exceptions. Most games that I worked on, that's not the case. You have to put the quality of the writing in the smaller moments because people
True,
won't finish it. So you can't say to them, "Hey, my story's awesome. Hang in there till the end. You'll really love the ending," because most of them won't get to the ending, right? What you have to say is, if you're paying attention to the writing, I will entertain you in this moment, and I will give you a reason to stick with these characters or to continue to listen. I'm going to make it so you really want to listen to that next cutscene because I've kind of set it up for something, right? Like I've kind of held out a carrot for you that makes you want to go to it. But it's very much giving people quality in the moment of their experience,
true, true,
not
true.
over the long haul of it. And it's a different kind of writing, and it's got different goals, and you have to think of it somewhat differently in order to deliver that.
True, 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 very true. Yeah. And so I believe that all of us creators who create our own visions and our own dreams, so we are always intentionally willing to put our inner self into those things that we craft. Is it true for you as well, this statement of mine?
Absolutely. And I think like you have to think about how you're going to do that.
Okay.
So, for instance, I'll give you two examples. So, my novella, which I wrote, I had the idea for it, which was about this guy who's like the head butler of a dungeon, right? So, it came out of during COVID, I played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons with my friends online,
Okay.
and I really felt like at some point I was like, man, the goblins and kobolds in this story really got the short end of the stick. I'm going to tell a story from their point of view. Um, and I thought it was already going to be a charming story, but in the middle of it, my father passed away. And he was 90 and he was a lovely father, and I loved him very much. But the experience of watching him get really old and then go through the last phase of his life was really emotionally impactful for me. And it was the thing that was on my mind. So I put that into the story. It had not been in the original outline.
I see.
And a lot of people, if you look at the reviews on Amazon, talk about how it's going along as a classic sort of satire on Dungeons and Dragons, and then all of a sudden it gains a lot more emotional impact as you realize that this character is losing his father figure, and it's completely out of my like not only my personal experience, but my personal experience literally at the moment I was writing it. Um, so I think that that gave resonance. And as a writer, you're always looking, like if you're writing about a couple, you want to kind of reach out to your own relationship and
True, true,
figure
true.
out like
I agree. I totally agree
how
with you. Yeah.
how can one inform the other. You have to be careful that your spouse doesn't think you're winning all the arguments with them in this other thing where you're telling the story, but and you have complete control, right? You don't want your main character's spouse to be a real jerk, or your wife will start to wonder. uh, but in Sleeping Dogs, for instance, on a funnier and less serious level. So my wife is ethnically Chinese. She was born in England and grew up in Canada, but her family, the lineage goes back to Hong Kong. So it's actually my closest connection to Hong Kong is
Nice.
all of my in-laws. And in the Chinese culture, in the especially the Southern Chinese culture, like everyone is an uncle. So I have like 40 uncles that are not blood related to me, but they're called uncles and they treat you that way. If you're part of the clan, you're part of the family. And some of whom I've only ever met at weddings and things, and others I've traveled with and know really well. And some of our cousins who are not like blood cousins, but just relatives somehow, we know them very well. Every single one of them appears as a character in Sleeping Dogs, almost always as really vile criminals.
Nice.
Like all of the terrible, terrible gangsters are somehow based on my
Do
extended
they know it, by the way? Do they
in-laws.
know it?
Yes. So my wife knows. Um, all the young people know, right? And many of them live in India and played the game, and we're absolutely thrilled. They sometimes you have to kind of work hard to find them in the game, but
I
they're all
see.
in there somewhere. But yes, and the older people kind of vaguely know, but it doesn't mean anything to them.
I
But
see.
no, I mean, if you have 400 or 500 characters, you've got to have some way of picking
True,
names
true.
and giving them
True,
personalities. So
true,
I'm just
true,
like,
true,
I'm
true.
just going to use my family and
True,
have some
true.
fun with it. So
Nice.
to this day, if you Google my wife's email, which I won't give you, but what you get is a whole bunch of YouTube videos of the mission in Sleeping Dogs that I named after her email, because it has a vaguely Asian name to it, right? So, yeah, it's quite every once in a while. Like she works in the medical industry, and a doctor will be like, "Why? I went searching for you, and I just got a whole bunch of Sleeping Dog stuff." So yeah, it's fun.
She has to explain it, right? She's not a
Yeah, yeah. Well,
gangster
and
or
every once in a
anything.
while, you'll get a heart surgeon who's also a video game nut, and all of a sudden I got a new fan out of nowhere. So,
Nice, nice, nice. And by the way, I'm sorry for your loss. So, and I appreciate
oh,
your
that's quite all
honesty.
right.
By the way, I appreciate your honesty. And what I wanted to say is that like it's very nice of you that you really put together this great story, and it's also very charming to understand because I remember myself playing as a kid Sleeping Dogs for the first time after I also like played the first two true crime games. Is that like I really felt that this game Sleeping Dogs is really about like connections and family, right? So in a bigger picture, it has a lot of plot twists, but also like a message that family is very important and loyalty to the people. And what you have just said that you really resonated with this when you have written these stories is it was very interesting to hear about for me.
Well, thank you very much. And yeah, I think it's the way you get a good story is okay. I'm not a gangster, and I didn't grow up in the Hong Kong crime scene, but I have a family, right? And so I think everyone can relate to. There's things that everyone can relate
True,
to
true,
that are
true,
sort
true.
of
Like the core
universal.
messages, right, of our life.
Absolutely. And so we don't all need to be undercover cops to
True,
understand
true, true,
both
true,
the attraction of family and the
true,
value, but then also how they can sometimes pull you astray and create conflicting
true,
loyalties, or
true,
you have that brother that wants you to do something that you're sort of
true.
like, well, I want to help him out, but I'm not so sure if this
Yeah,
is the
what a
right
lot
thing
of
to
people are
do.
not understanding is like the stories always has their characters and their plot and their setting is like a cover, right? And behind that cover, like I said before, there is always like a very core message that the author or the writer wants to give to the consumers of that form of art or media.
Yes, absolutely. And I think people resonate best with characters and relationships as opposed to plot. Like plot
True.
is fun. I love plot, but the thing that separates anything, whether it's a book or a game or a movie, is can we identify with the characters and can we have some kind of emotional connection with
True.
whatever they're going through, which is usually based on relationships.
True. 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 Okay, so a more personal question again from me. I hope that you don't mind these questions of mine.
That's quite all
So,
right.
loyalty is very important in Sleeping Dogs and this in the story of Sleeping Dogs. Was it something, and is it something that was important for you in your life as well? That's why you chose this type of formats to form the story of or about, if you can say so.
Well, so two things I should say there. One is that, I didn't work on the original version of the
Okay,
game.
okay,
So
okay.
almost all of the spoken dialogue in the finished version of the game was written by me, but the core idea of it, the sort of, the Departed or the Infernal Affairs
I
roots
see.
of the story were there already.
I see. I see. I see.
So I think loyalty is very important, but I don't want to appear to take credit for
I
having
see.
put that in the game because I think it was cooked in before I got there. And then the question was, okay, we've got stick figures running around, and maybe we haven't got the
I see.
dialogue
I
for
see. I
them
see.
yet, or the cutscene is half finished, but we've changed the game so much that like why are these two people meeting now? And so as I was saying earlier about the sequel, we had to stitch together the pieces of the story
I see.
in order to make the game a whole. But a lot of times, especially for me, I can kind of see the duct tape and the bubble gum holding it together behind the scenes. But I do think loyalty is a really powerful human instinct, and
Okay.
it's one that will resonate with people.
I see.
Whether it's loyalty to your kind of friends or your family or your clan or your religion or
True. True. True.
your gaming group, right? It
True.
almost doesn't matter. Everyone can understand what that is, so it becomes a good anchor to build a story around. In the way that I think it wouldn't have been as compelling if it was just police procedural where you're trying to catch the bad guys. You need something that is more human and more sort of
True.
deeply rooted that the audience can totally get behind. And I think the other thing that happens in a game, and this happens in books and movies too, so we're playing along and we're mostly engaging with the members of the crime family, Winston and his mother, and Jackie and the other characters. And so our affinity as a player goes to them. Like we don't spend a lot of time bonding with the police, and obviously your police controller is I think his name is Pendrew, is kind of a corrupt cop anyway. So we're not forming any bonds with them. We're forming bonds with the characters. So you want to build a story that, I think in any game writing, what you want to do is think, okay, what's the player's experience of the game going to be? Now, how do I make a story that kind of aligns with that? So if just the mechanical playing of the game creates an affinity with these characters, I'm going to make the guy have an affinity with the characters, and now I'm going to mess with that, right? Like once I've got you liking these people, now I can
True.
start to twist that, or I can kill some characters, or
True.
whatever I want to do to play with your emotions.
True. 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 Yeah, so I asked about loyalty, by the way, because I feel like nowadays, especially, it's really something a lot of humans are missing, right? At least in my opinion. So I feel like games like you have been working on, especially like Sleeping Dogs, is a game that really shows that it's important. And I think like these forms of art, like video games as well, could really teach us that loyalty is also like a very important thing and like family for us, right? So yeah, that's why I think it's very important to appreciate these moments in video games, in their stories, especially to learn about these kinds of things that should be important for us as well in everyday life. But somehow I feel like that's what we are missing in the bigger picture nowadays. But yeah. Okay, so
Sure.
throughout the life of yours, what was your favorite project that you have been working on so far?
Um, Well, I mean, Sleeping Dogs still stands out as one of my most favorite.
Okay.
Let's see. So the project I just finished for T minus zero, I really enjoyed the team there. They're just really nice people, and I think that game will be fun. It's a couple of years from being finished, so I'm cautiously optimistic that it's just going to be fun to play. Like the mechanics are very fun
I
to
see.
play, and the narrative wrapper. It's not a narrative driven game, which is why I still work with them, but sometimes if a game is more action oriented, I'll come in, write the story, create the characters, and then there's really nothing for me to do until they progress the game in development, and then I'll go back and write dialogue and work specifically with mission designers to make more customized, sort of more micro bits of writing. So that was just fun to work on. And then I think lately the fiction has been really enjoyable. I think in part it goes back to something you were asking about before. When I was 8 years old, I was dreaming of writing novels, right? So to a certain extent, there's just an emotional sort of feedback that you get when you get to do that that is greater than, weirdly, I obviously watched a lot of movies growing up, but I was never daydreaming of being a movie writer. I was daydreaming of being a novelist. So it's been very satisfying to write the movies that I wrote. And I wrote, that in Hollywood, it's very common to um, get paid to write things. So it's a working job for me that allowed me to support myself. But the movies or the TV shows never got made. That's very common. And so, there's a bunch of shows there that probably will never see the light of day, but were immensely satisfying to work on, which is it's an odd thing to say, but there's a couple scripts that I'm really proud of that probably will never get made because they're based on video games and the rights have expired. So if that game ever does get adapted, it won't be my version of it now. It goes out, but I still keep them on my kind of like writing samples thing, and every once in a while, someone will read one and think like, "Oh, how come that never came out?" Uh, so it's actually one reason to love books because even if the book is not a massive success, it's gonna like I control whether it will be
True,
published or not because
true,
I can always
true, true.
self-publish it,
There's a
and I have enough
bigger
of
freedom, right, in that, yeah, of releasing
yeah,
it.
and some people will read it. Like some of the best scripts I ever wrote will never get read by people outside of Hollywood, whereas the book will find readers. So I'm hoping it finds a large number of readers, but even if it finds a small number, it still had an impact on some people. So.
I see. I see. By the way, so again, a more personal question. So, do you or have you ever had like moments in your life when you were questioning yourself as a writer throughout the
Oh,
process of
absolutely.
writing something, for example, for a video game or your own novel or for movies?
Uh, that happens on every single project. I think that's an integral part of
And how do you
the
deal with it?
experience. At the very beginning, I think I just panicked, and
I see.
and it can be very difficult. And I think there's a few projects I worked on where, because I didn't have enough confidence in my own writing, other people or other voices kind of steered it in ways that now, with the experience I have, I would have stuck more to my guns.
I see.
But if you're working with a very famous actor and they're like, "Hey, I don't think this works," it's hard to dispute it when they've been in 40 movies and this is the first one you've ever written, right? So I think dealing with self-doubt and dealing with, people always talk about the imposter syndrome, the sense that you don't belong, you don't deserve to be there. That exists on every single project, and it's
I
just
see.
what you it's it's if you're writing a character who is, let's say, a fighter or an undercover cop or a hero of some kind, you know, um, they're almost always you're going to have to ask yourself how this person deals with fear, and they're always the cliche answer is that you come to terms with your fear. You don't make it vanish, right? It just you come to terms with the fact that you're feeling fear. I think for writers, you never get rid of imposter syndrome. You just come to terms with it. You
True,
just,
true, true.
when it happens, you're just like, oh yeah, okay, this is what this is. I need to listen to it if it's telling me that the thing that this is wrong and needs to be improved, right? And
That
because
little
often,
devil, right?
yeah, sometimes the little devil
Or
in your
little
ear
fairy,
is
yeah, yeah,
yeah is correct, right? Like, oh,
yeah,
this isn't working, you need to change it.
yeah.
But sometimes it's not, like I just sent something. I have a team of beta readers who are just either people who are on my mailing list or fans of my work, and sometimes it's my immediate circle of friends. And because the stories I'm telling are kind of derived from playing Dungeons and Dragons. I have two Dungeons and Dragons campaigns, and the people in those campaigns often read it because they know where it came from. And I'll send something out, and I will have no idea if it is good or not. Right? Like I've just been working on it for so long, I'm so close to it. I kind of vaguely think I've done the best I could with it, but is a reader going to enjoy it or not? I have no idea. And so you just have to send it out and then wait for them to come back. And so I'm just in the process of getting that feedback now. And so far, the people who have read it really like it. Everyone has notes. There's still things to change, but like they're kind of carried along by the story. But I don't think anyone ever gets past their self doubt. I think
True,
that's just
true,
part of the business.
true. The most important thing, in my opinion, is that you really have to stick to your vision, right? Like if you have a vision, you have to stick to it, no matter what.
Yeah, I think again, it really depends on the genre that you're or the medium you're working in. So, for instance, when I'm writing fiction, yes, I am the only person there. I have dreamed this thing up. I'm only responsible to myself. So, yes, I really try to stick to the vision. And what I'm asking my readers is, without telling them, 'cause I don't want to tell them what the vision is, but I'm asking them, what are you getting from this? And then I'm seeing whether they got the emotional experience I was trying to give them. Uh, but if you're working in a video game, often the writer, again, if you're Amy Henning or if you're working on like Last of Us or something, the writer is driving the train, so to speak. But most of the games that I work on, writing is more of a support function. It's game design is really the heart of it, and the creative director is spending most of his or her time on the game component of it and
I
only on the
see.
narrative kind of when they have spare time. And often I'm the person who owns the narrative for the design of the game, the development of the game. I'm asking myself constantly, how can I support the game? Right? How can I support the player experience and the thing that the creative director is trying to do?
And do you think
So
like it's taking away your freedom of writing? By the way, sorry for interrupting you.
no, no, not at all. Well, it's not actually. I think this is slightly cliche too, but I think it's very true, which is sometimes by being in a box, by
I
having the
see.
lines drawn for you, it actually makes you more creative. You
I
just have
see.
to embrace the idea that, okay, on
Because
this
it might be a
project,
bigger box, right? That you could
yeah,
not think of. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Sometimes having boundaries to work within is actually really useful to coming up with the best
I see.
sort of creative
I
solutions.
see.
So, in that case, sometimes you're really trying to make somebody else's creative vision as good as humanly possible, and you're applying your craft to that particular problem as opposed to I'm just trying to invent a
I
story
see.
and
I see.
invent
I see. I see.
characters.
I
So
see.
it very much depends. And movies are somewhere in between, and even in a movie, some of the movies I've done, we my company licensed the IP, so it's based on a video game. We're working with whatever the world of that game is, but then I've created it from the ground up. So I'm protecting that vision from the studio. For instance, not that they're necessarily bad people, but they'll have notes, and I'm trying to protect it. But in other cases, either the studio hired me, so they're like, "Hey, we want to make this thing. We're going to put you in charge of it, but you're going to you're making the thing that we want you to make." Or like in the case of Mortal Kombat Legacy, the vision was really the director. He had made a short film.
I see.
He had a really clear vision of how he wanted to make Mortal Kombat. My job was not to impose my vision on it. My job was to figure out what he was trying to do, and with the amount of money that we had and the other limitations we had, make that as good as possible. So it really varies from medium to medium and project to project.
I see. I see. And were you thinking of like making your very own game with your very own story?
The challenge. I know that there are things like Twine out there where you could make your own interactive video game. Maybe one day. I think what is more attractive to me, simply because I'm not very technical and I'm always short of time, and so I'd rather be doing narrative than the other
I see.
elements of the game. And I apologize. Now there's a huge heavy machine working across the road, so I don't know
No,
if
it's okay. It's
you're
okay. It's
hearing
okay.
it, but the the game I'm working on now, for instance, is a small studio, but very experienced people, very talented people. Like I said, mainly from Sleeping. Yeah, they go all the way back to Sleeping Dogs. All of them have worked on 4 or 5 games since then. Uh, where the creative team is the creative director came up with the idea, but his version of the idea you could have written on a cocktail napkin, the story. Uh, and so, as the narrative person on that game, I'm not even sure what we're all. like we've been friends for 20 years. I have no idea what my title is. I just know I'm working on it. But I get to own that story, but I don't have to worry about the game execution of all of the other elements. That's probably the best possible
I see.
world for
I
me.
see. I see.
So everyone has a lot of respect for each other. It's not that I get to write anything. I'm still answerable to the creative director, but really I have free reign to create the story within the sandbox that we're working in. But all I'm worried about is story.
I
I'm
see.
not worried
I
at
see.
all about the art style or the mechanics of combat or how to hook it all up in a game engine or any of that.
I see. I see. And would you like to have your novels made into a story game or story-oriented game, by the way?
That's a fun idea. And
Because you could
since I
combine
started,
your two passions, right?
yeah, and so there is a world in which that might happen one day. I think the something we talk about a lot, like since I started writing fantasy novels, I made friends in that world, all of whom are much more successful than me because I'm really just starting out. So now I have this social circle, I guess you could say, of people who are writing games that would plug into, say, Dungeons and Dragons or one of the other Pathfinder or something, an existing game system very well, and each of them has a unique take on it, right? As my books do, and there's a part of me that thinks we should be building D&D modules. So we're not going to reinvent the game system. We're just going to take somebody's character, the world that they've built, and the sort of plot twists and the unique sort of situations, and create that so that fans of the game could go play it, right? And make different decisions and go off on their own, the way you do when you play
True,
Dungeons and
true, true,
Dragons or
true.
any tabletop role playing game. Um, the challenge is simply hours in the day. Like, that's it. I know there are people making D&D modules and finding a lot of success with it, but it just, I barely have time to, like I said, I don't even have time to finish Baldur's Gate. So turning my books into D&D modules is something, maybe one day, but it's going to be a
Yeah,
while before I have the spare time.
because all the way we were talking about your life, I can tell. Like I was telling you before, at the beginning of our interview, I can tell that writing novels is still very important for you, and I appreciate that
Yeah,
because a very important thing for me, and I believe is also a very important thing for everyone in this world, is like having secure our childhood, right, and childhood memories, and having our inner kid, our inner child being at the same day as we live in, right? So I appreciate that you are still going back to that day of yours or the dreams of yours, writing novels. And I think that's why I asked that you should really like
sure.
combine those two passions of yours. That would be a great idea for you. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Well, it ties into my main sort of recreational passion too, which is games of one sort or another. So,
True.
that
True.
the novels come out of the D&D campaigns that I
True. True.
played,
True.
not so much the actual characters and story, but the emotions that they evoked made me start to dream up new characters and new situations and a different point of view. So if I could take a game I played, turn it into a book, then turn that back into a version of a game, like that's sort of
True. True. True.
whatever, that's squaring the circle in a
Yeah.
in a really beautiful
Closing down
way.
the circle as well. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay. And so you also mentioned that about your novel that you picked up a character which was not that popular in the D&D era or genre, if you could say. So how did you develop this mentality of yours of writing a story about a character that might be not that popular in the D&D genre? Like, what was the motive of behind that decision of yours? Because it's very
well,
interesting to me and it's very lovely in my opinion. It really reminds me of the game called Gollum, if you know about that game.
I
That
don't, but that sounds
Yeah,
like my kind of thing.
yeah. So there was a game like some years ago in the Lord of the Ring universe about Gollum, right? Smeagol, and for a lot of people, they did not like the game. I loved it because I feel like I feel like the story was brilliant. The game had like, I don't know, 30 or 40 hours of story, and I love the perspective of showing that Gollum was like a very important character in the Lord of the Ring universe. Like, people forget it, that he was the helper of Frodo and Sam,
Sure.
who really defeated the bad guys in the Lord of the Ring universe, and people forget it, like, right? So it's like it was so heartwarming to see that developers of that game really touched the very from a very important and unique aspect of the Lord of the Rings story, that yes, Gollum matters. And for me, when you told us that for your novel you really touched of those characters that might not be that popular for a lot of players of D&D, I really resonated with that feeling.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm glad. I think that you're like the classic sort of fan for you're my target audience for sure.
I will
In
read your
terms of
book, I promise.
uh,
Let me know
it,
where I can buy it, and
I will send you a copy.
thank
I'm
you.
happy to send you a copy.
I will have a gift for you as
You-
well. I will let you know
yeah,
about it after our
we,
interview.
we'll, that's great. I appreciate that. Yeah, so the original starting point was that in playing Dungeons and Dragons, I started to feel certain injustices that, you're just having fun with your friends, right? So it's not like a really big political thing, but
True,
it's like,
true, true.
hey, we're just wiping out whole villages of goblins. We're calling ourselves the heroes, but we sometimes don't act in ethical ways, right? Like my friends are just murdering people for the sake of murdering them. That doesn't really seem right, you know?
True.
And so then that started me on the journey of like, I wonder what like this world of adventures looks like from the point of view of these characters. So the first book is called Major Domo, and it's about a kobold who's not very powerful, right? Like they're very weak monsters. But he's like the head butler. Major Domo is like the head of the household for a very powerful necromancer. And he's had a really hard life, but now he's in a great job. Like this is a perfect job for a kobold. Like he's achieved his perfect life. The necromancer kind of treats him like a son. He's got a found family. His life would be perfect, except that these groups of heroes keep coming along, trying to burn his home to the ground and murder everyone in it and steal all their gold, right? And so it's the reversal of the Dungeons and Dragons trope. And then the book that I'm is just out to beta readers now is about a goblin slave who's been, this human duchy that's, overrun his village, captured him, enslaved him. But the people that own him are idiots. They're all selfish and greedy, and they're morons. And they have an existential threat from an undead army that's sort of just over the horizon, a little bit like global warming. And they're all in denial that there's a problem coming, right? But he can see it clear as day, and he decides that if he's going to survive, like if the undead come and kill everyone, he's going to die too, right? So he's got to save these kind of people that have enslaved him from themselves. And so the question is, can the weakest person in the castle, literally, right, manipulate politics in a way to save them from this existential threat? And then the third one, I'm just doing the way that I work is like one is published, one is sort of now in the polishing phase, but that doesn't take all of your time. I'm outlining the next one, so I'm just kind of moving on. All of these will sort of interweave with each other.
I
So
see.
the third one is about a familiar who is owned by a wizard, but is sick of being sent on these suicide missions, which is another thing that happens in my D&D campaigns is people pull their familiar out of thin air, send them around the corner to see what's there, and then the monster kills them, right? So this familiar's experience of life is their life is very short, after which some troll crushes them or a trap dumps burning acid on them or whatever. And so she's totally traumatized and has to figure out like what is the meaning of her life and can she kind of negotiate with the gods as she thinks of them that control it to find a better life for her. So each time it's the most weak and disempowered characters in the classic fantasy universe, and each is trying to find a fulfilling life for themselves. But at the same time, having fun with D&D tropes, making fun of the classic sort of styles of play, and often the people that you would think of as heroes are usually the bad guys, and the lords and the high elves are often either so selfish that they're unable to do the right thing, or like they're always sort of flawed in some major way. That's a problem for our hero, whoever our hero is.
I see. And that's very lovely of you that you really like touching those topics of like making the world for a better place to live in, right? So it's always it's not always, I mean, but it's sometimes the bad guys who is questioning more that if we live in a right world, right? And we don't think about that. And I discussed this on my other past like Dev Life episodes, which is like very current that you had said just now, that I feel like the most important thing that we are missing nowadays is like questioning and seeing behind the curtain of people, right? Like we are too
Sure.
judgy of everything. And uh, there's a show like about serial killers where the person who makes interviews with them always questioning them why they like had those decisions about like serial killing and why they went down this road. And it's very interesting for me to watch those interviews as well, because I feel like what we are missing nowadays, it's like we are not questioning the roots of bad situations, right? We just judge them and we just like want to box them in a box that, okay, it's bad. And of course, on one hand, it's understandable. I'm not saying like we should like support serial killers. Don't get me wrong. It's just like people do not understand that every decision is made by someone who had like something in their life, and we have to question them in order to like prevent people of doing bad things. First, we have to question why they do this, right? So it's like in school shootings, right? So people do not question why people like started these things. And like at your books as well, it's like resonate to that topic, is like why goblins are bad, like why goblins are killing people, the heroes of who we support, that they are the real heroes of the D&D. But why they have to fight with goblins, right? Are they bad, are they
Right.
not bad? So it's a very interesting situation. And I think like it's also like a very common thing, that what I said is that we are missing as human beings, is that to question not just our like decisions, and also like help us in order to evolve ourselves as a human being, but also like question others as well and to understand them, right? So I think that's how we can prevent bad thing, not just okay, say that he's a bad person, we should, I don't know, kill them, or he should go to jail or something like that, because that's stupid. That won't end the real problem. That's not the root of the problem, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting also to think about. I mean, there are absolutely some terrible people in the world,
True,
and
true,
and
true,
where the good and evil is
true,
very clear. But
true.
often the and I think those people are out there. They don't make for as interesting stories. Like if you're like that, another sort of rule of thumb, if you're if you're telling a classic sort of story with a bad guy, is to put some thought into what the bad guy's point of view is, and don't
True.
make him just. He's still got to support being a bad guy. He's
Yeah,
still got to be
exactly,
the
exactly.
opposition to our
Like he's not
to
safe
our
from his things that he have done to people or to the world, right? It's just he has
yeah.
also like a life that he was living, and it's not that it's interesting to see that word, but it's interesting, I think, for people to understand him, what would cause him to do those bad things, right? Because I feel like what I feel like is that like you said, there are some real bad people in our world, and these in these stories there also are sometimes very bad characters. But I feel like as kids, we are not like we were never born as kids for being bad, right? So it's
Sure.
like when we
Yeah.
are coming to this earth, we are not like those bad people. We are just kids, right? Being creative, enjoying life. And when we grow up and we develop our character by, all these impulse that we are getting from out the world, or our families and friends and school, and I don't know from where, from work, for example, we never know how it will affect us. So I think it's very important to understand that. And I appreciate your stories, because they really like teach people for this, if they are willing to, for example, of course, consume those core messages of your books.
Yeah, and I think no matter what you're writing, one thing you want to do is engage people, and so sometimes having a different approach can be very engaging. I mean, I read a lot of fantasy fiction, but I start to find my mind drifting if it's just, the kid who grew up on a farm and he gets his father's sword and there's like an evil empire and he's got to go, and you're like, yeah, yeah, I've read this 1,000 times before,
True, true,
right?
true, true.
Um, it's so give me something different is
True.
always a good way to start. And then I think one way you hold people in is if you can make them think, right? If you can
True.
challenge them, you don't want to make the Nazis the hero, right? But if you can challenge people to see different sides of something, or even just to to find villains intriguing without you don't
Exactly.
have to buy their point of view, but it makes for a better story. Like it's more engaging and more entertaining.
True.
So why not do it? The mustache twirling evil guy that's just evil because he's evil is kind of boring,
Boring. Yeah,
right?
exactly, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. Okay. Do you feel like you're also a person who like feels small but wants to change the world for the better? Because you were telling us that your stories of novels have these little creatures who might have a bigger perspective of how to change the world for the better. Do you feel like it's you in these novels?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you always want to have an emotional impact on
I see.
people. And I think there's 100 different ways you can aspire to that, whether it's poking fun at, I mean, the book I'm working on now is like, okay, so it's about a goblin slave and whatever. He's got all these ridiculous things he's got to do, but it's kind of an allegory for global warming without really getting in people's face about it, right?
True, true.
I think you can you can stray too far in terms of having a message, and then again, I think you lose your reader because you sort of you put the message ahead of good characters and good storytelling.
True, 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 true.
So you always want to strike a balance, um, but I think that something that human society has done for tens of thousands of years is we tell ourselves stories in order for us to understand better what our experience is.
True,
So,
true, true.
if my novella where it's about losing your father isn't going to change the world, but it might make people like we're all going to go through that experience, right?
True,
Like it's
true, true,
like unless we die when we're really young,
true,
at some point we're going to lose our parents, and most of us that's going to be a tragedy, right? Like we're going to
true.
wish that they were still around. So that's a universal thing that by telling a story about it, maybe you can help people to just have like a slightly different perspective, or even just to not feel alone. Like
True.
sometimes it's not
That you're
that you're
connected
lecturing
with
them.
that thought and that experience.
Yeah, you're just
Exactly.
saying, hey, I went through this too,
Exactly.
right?
Like you would be
And
holding the hand of the readers, right? It's like the close connection throughout your books.
yeah, I think it sometimes just, and I've learned this about, there's a lot of different aspects of life where um, simply learning that everyone else is going through it too is very comforting and very valuable. Like it makes it easier to go
True.
through that journey yourself.
True.
Just, emotional troubles, it's not like getting a bunch of money or some other physical thing is going to help you. It's just something you have to kind of ride out, right? And
True.
experience, process for yourself. So one of the most valuable things you can have is a sense that you're not alone in it. And so that is something just by telling stories about that thing, whether it's falling in love, losing the person you're in love with, losing a parent, wanting something you can't have, you know, whatever the emotion is that you're trying to deal with, all of them are you can you can legitimately uh, affect people's lives by telling a meaningful story there. Even if you never, like occasionally people do write me and say, oh, I went through this experience too, and this really this really spoke to me. But like most readers, I never hear from, right? So, but you sort of know on some level that if one person took the time to write you that, it's there's probably hundreds of others that had the same experience and just don't ever bother to email the author.
True. True. Nice. Okay, are you down to go into some questions from my community and from the chat?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah.
Nice, nice, nice. Okay, let me know if there is any question. Oh, so Minnie is asking that for how many years are you planning to write? Is there like a sweet spot where you like would like to drop and end your career? How do you feel about that?
There's no sweet spot, but I would like to evolve. So
I see.
I think the older I get, and there's lots of other factors at play. Like, is my wife retired? Are we financially able to do all the things we want to do? I would love to transition slowly from uh, working, writing as work to writing as like a creative endeavor that I don't care if it makes money anymore. So I think, in a perfect world, if I'm mentally able to, I'd still be writing stories when I'm 90, right? But I would no longer be in any particular rush, nor would I be too worried
Just for
about the
yourself,
market.
right?
Just for myself,
Yeah.
yeah. Uh, so, or putting them out there to people, but not caring, like a big, no matter what field I'm in or writing in at the moment, a big part of the work is not just the creative storytelling. It's like, okay, how are we, if we're making the movie, how are we making the movie or getting the movie financed? If it's a novel, how am I going to get it past the 30 or 40 people I know to a wider, fan base? If it's a game, how am I interfacing with the rest of the development team? I mean, sometimes these teams are 400 people, uh, and so it would be nice to sort of diminish that and just
I
be
see.
able to be creative.
So do not have
But
that
yeah,
sacrifice, right, to have a bigger audience just because of that fact, like to sacrifice something that might not work out in the story, right?
yeah, sure. My wife loves to travel, so I think our hero scenario would be we go somewhere, we go to the south of France, we get some little house, and I get up in the morning with my coffee and my baguette, and I write for a couple hours, and then we go do the rest of our life. That would be joy. Yeah. But we're a few. That's a ways off yet.
Nice, love that, love that. Thank you for the question and the answer as well, by the way. Okay, Minnie is asking another question. Like, do you feel like you really found yourself by writing stories for video games and your novels as well, or do you feel like you still have some goals with your writings? Like, do you feel like you still want to do something in your life with writing stories that you haven't done yet?
Oh, yes, very much. In fact, I think, what another reason to try to write until you're well into old age is that I already have a list of ideas in my head that I know I will never, like, there's more ideas than I can possibly get to. And there are business considerations that steer you to some or the other. So, for instance, it's much the smart move in terms of fiction is to keep writing fantasy because as you build up a fan base, you want to keep feeding that
True,
fan
true,
base.
true.
So I have some more literary ideas that are more about relationships and marriage and things like that, but have nothing to do with fantasy. If I were to take a year and try to turn that into a book, it wouldn't be a very wise commercial venture. It might be good creatively, and on the game side, um, there's a few games that I've been discussing with developers for years and years and years. We'd love to do it. Will it ever get financed? Will we have a chance to do it? Who can say? And so, on video games, I'm much more constrained by like what games are actually in production and that I can kind of be a part of. And so there's a bunch that I've never been able to do. There's one game that got canceled where the key creatives we're all still friends and we often work together. And we're like, okay, well, we're never going to do that IP because the IP is owned by a publisher, but the underlying story that we created could be turned to a different IP
I
or
see.
turned to an independent game. And we really want to tell that story one day. And so maybe we will, maybe, like who knows?
Who knows? Yeah.
So yes, there's a lot of I don't know what you want to say, unsatisfied goals, and I think there always will be some, but the more I get to do, the happier I am.
I see. I see. And were there stories, by the way, that you have done, either if it was for games or just for your novels or in the very younger age of yourself, uh, what you were not happy of that much and you like had to go back to those stories and reinvent them?
Yes, so there's a few that I wish I could go back and redo. I did, for instance, I did two Dead Rising movies, and Hollywood movies with big studios are always challenging. And it's not anybody's fault. No one was a bad actor, but we never got the version of that movie that I really wanted to do, and I wrote it, and we didn't get a chance to make it, and I'd love to make it one day, even if
I
it's got
see.
nothing to do with Dead Rising. It's just a character-driven story about a guy trapped in a zombie apocalypse who's slowly losing his mind. And then I did another one that I developed a TV show. I sold it to CBS. This is in 2004, I think. Uh, and then it never got made, which is very common, especially because we were very green, and I think the network was reluctant to trust a bunch of complete rookies. But it was about a pandemic. It was a story of a bunch of people that got sealed into an apartment building because the building had the virus in it, and the authorities just had to quarantine them. And it's all about the drama of these people worried about being sick, but also just being stuck in a confined location, sometimes without their partners or sometimes with, like their ex and like whatever, all the drama you would put into a TV show. And when it didn't get made as a TV show, I started to write it as a novel. But it was the first novel I'd ever tried, and I couldn't finish it. Uh, and I wish before COVID I had had a novel about a bunch of people trapped in a quarantine, slowly going crazy, because that would have been, very applicable. Now it would feel like an exploitation of COVID, but somewhere down the road, I'm sure I will revisit that idea and just try. I'll have to start it from scratch, but um, I'd love to do that one day. So yes, there's tons of short stories I'd like to improve, and I mean, it's the list is endless.
I see. I see. Okay, so before I go into some more questions and people can ask some more questions, I have two experiences that I would like to share that are very close to me. One is connected with sleeping dogs, and one is connected to like writing. So the first one is that connected to sleeping dogs is that I remember myself when I first bought the copy of the PlayStation 3 version, and it was a very funny story because here in Hungary it has been released by the version of the Russian disc version, and all
Mm.
Hungarians got the Russian version. And I was so lucky that by that time, since my childhood, I knew Russian language, not just Hungarian and English, and I was lucky to understand the Russian version of the game. So I did not have to, sell back to the company that I purchased from the game. So yeah, it's a small story. It might be not interesting, but I just wanted to tell you that I was so passionate about the game that I played through on Russian and then on English language as well.
Wow.
So I love the game for the first sight of it. And the other thing is that I wanted to ask from my experience is that since I have been writing poems and I also were writing books, but I was never really had this. I wouldn't say confidence, but I don't know. Without going deeply into the politics, so I have touched some word criticizing topics that might be politically oriented. So what would your advice be for people like me who would like to release their books if they want to do that? Since I
Well,
love
listen.
writing as well, and I was writing poems. I was, which is a very funny story. When I read your biography on your webpage, it was really nice to read that you have been writing to video game magazines as well. Because I was doing that too, like for 10 years, and I left video game websites and companies for writing them as a reviewer of games. Since I felt like these days, especially online websites who are like writing video game reviews, all of the bosses who work there like wanted me to criticize games, like I was telling you before our interview, right? And I hated that. I felt like nowadays it's like you do not have a freedom of yours to love games and to really give that positive perspective about video games, loving them, right? So it's more about like, okay, you have to score games connected to Metacritic scores. Okay, you have to hate, especially a very good example of the game called Gollum, right? It was the most hated
Mm.
video game of all time. It got like 2 out of 10 scores, and I hated it because I remember myself giving an 8 out of 10. And my boss did not let me at the company that I worked for because they were telling me that how could you give an 8 out of 10 if it's a Metacritic score 2 out of 10? And I was telling them, and here is my article, please read it. And they did not care, like they did not care at all. And if you read my article now, it's like a fully positive article about the game, sharing my story about the game, how it really supports the feeling of understanding Gollum as a character who is very important in Lord of the Rings. People just did not
Sure.
care about it. And if you see the score 2 out of 10, it's like not resonating with each other because my boss tuned it down to 2 from 8, right? So that's why I left
Right.
a lot of companies. And so from speaking of these experiences of mine, like how should I start going into like releasing my books? What's your advice for that?
Well, so my advice would be, first of all, my background is in political science, so I'm sort of aware of
Okay.
some of the potential political issues you may face, but probably not. I'm not nearly steeped in them enough. I'm much more familiar with the challenges of doing creative work in China because I work with Chinese game publishers all the time. Uh, so, I would say the first thing you have to do is make sure you understand what the context is for putting your work into the public sphere at all. But you will know that better than me or anyone else. I think the great thing is now there are so many avenues for getting your work out there. It's really a question of what your sort of end goals are. So, for instance, for me, having written on video games that had very big audiences and a lot of press coverage, I didn't care if my books at the beginning came out in somewhat obscure, like I just self-published them. They're going to reach, like the first one sold about 1,000 copies, so which is really good for starting from scratch. But at the same time, I'm a long way from Stephen King. And if I had tried to go through a traditional publisher, I would have faced a lot of rejection. But maybe if I had got it in there, eventually a bigger exposure. But I was willing to, it made sense for me just to be like, no, I don't want to, my day job is working with big corporations and trying to get things through movie studios or game publishers. I want my fiction to just go out into the world. So that suits me emotionally. But for you, I think it is a question of thinking strategically about, what is your goal, and what does suit you best, and then pursue it that way. So self-publishing is terribly easy to get the book out there, and I know it's not my world, but I see quite a few poets who probably would never have gotten a wide audience. They would have at best got some government grants in Canada or the US. That's really how poets, I think, survive. Is there's a government grant to support creative people. They release a book, it sells not very many copies. But now through social media and through sort of book talk and all that, there are poets that are really reaching much, much bigger audiences. And so I would say decide what suits you best and then research it so that you can go, like for me, when I was releasing a fantasy novel, I went and spent a fair bit of time researching how people had released fantasy novels, what had worked, what hadn't,
I see.
and I had a plan out of that. And I think you could do the same for poetry. You could do the same for any other form of writing. If you wanted to talk, I mean, honestly, I think if you wanted to talk about video games without having to be overly critical, between
No,
Booktop, Instagram, blogging,
that's a main thing of on my Twitch. So my book is totally different from video games.
right.
It's like my life experiences, which has a bit of a criticizing of our real world, but not in the political sphere. So
Okay.
I don't really go into politics. I hate politics, to be honest. So, but I feel like the things that I criticize in our world, people connect it with politics, and
Sure.
that's the very part a bad part in our life, right? That a lot of people are so close-minded about politics that even if you are not into politics like I am, they will connect it with politics, and
Sure.
that's why
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm afraid to release it, because this book of mine that I'm talking about was like already like completed like 10 years ago, if so. I
Oh, okay.
finished it at
Sure.
the beginning of my university, but I'm still like very scared. I wouldn't say scared, because I'm confident the message it has, and I would like to get it to a lot of people, because I feel like I know it would sound strange, or it might sounds very egoistic, but I feel like the message of my book is really like could help people grow as a person, and that's why I wanted to release it. So you were talking about goals. That's why I answered you this. So I
Right.
feel like my goal is to really help people evolve and really help people see themselves in a way that they might could not see themselves. I do it in the daily. So when I talk to people, I share my message, not in a very intuitional level, but I share it like a very strict level with them to talk about these topics, but not talking about my book, right? So
Right.
and
Sure.
for me that's why I think like it would be important for me to release my book, because I feel like the topic that I'm discussing in my book is that, or the story is could be very important for people to relate to, especially nowadays. So yeah.
I, the last thing I'll say on that is I think, the trick for almost any book or commercial project of any kind is to find your tribe, right? Like find a group of people who are interested in that subject. These days, they're going to be on Discord, or they're going to be on social media, they're going to be wherever they're going to be, but they might be on Reddit. Like I know there are toxic elements of Reddit, but I go to the bits that talk about board games and about self-published writing and about things like that, fantasy, and the communities there are smaller, but they're very supportive, and they're everyone is sort of sharing the
Yeah,
same
but that's what I
experience.
wanted to say, is that I found hard to like about the process. So for me, it's I think not would be the fact that to found my audience, because I feel like my message is very common, because my message is
Mm.
like basically about childhood and the importance of childhood in my book, because childhood was very important for me, and I feel like it's also a thing that is very important to everyone. Like it's very interesting whenever I'm talking with people, I feel like it really resonates me back that childhood is a very important thing in everybody's life, right?
Right.
It's just some people like forget it, and I feel like the hard part is that I'm trying to like solve is that like how to publish it. So here in Hungary, it's way like more politically oriented, and that's why I was scared to do that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know how Hungary relates to Amazon, but the physical process of self-publishing, if you're willing to self-publish or if that's interested you, is quite easy on
Okay.
Amazon. For
Okay.
me, in I publish, even though I'm in Canada, it goes through Amazon.com and then it goes to all the other Amazon
Yes.
markets.
Okay.
But
Okay.
it's boy, it a few YouTube videos on how to do it, and you could post the thing in like an hour. It takes very little.
I see.
But you want to find a readership. That's what takes all the time.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you. Okay. Any more question? Any more question? Any more question? Bármilyen más kérdés, hölgyek, urak? Any more question? Bármilyen más kérdés? Can you think of the topic or of a topic that or I and you haven't touched and you would like to talk about, by the way, before I ask some more
I
questions?
No problem. No, I think you've really taken an interesting approach to the whole question of writing in video
Thank you.
games. So
Thank you.
I'm happy to go wherever you want, but there isn't like something sort of looming that I thought, oh, you missed it. I thought you did a really good job.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so what I wanted to ask before is that so you were talking about like you switched to like be more selective about the projects you choose, right? Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so and when you choose your projects, or when you would happen to choose your projects before, what made you or caused you choose that exact project that you started working on as a writer?
Well, I mean, one big thing is the quality of the people involved. So you
Okay.
really want to get up, like even a big famous IP that might be very prestigious, if the people are not pleasant to work with, it's
Okay.
not worth doing, even if they're paying you a lot of money. So I think that's the starting place. And then, honestly, it's I think guess the other thing is what level of satisfaction do I think I'm going to get out of it, which isn't always tied to either the quality of it or the nature of the project. So I just finished one. I can't really talk about what the gameplay is much because it's still very much under wraps, but it wouldn't be necessarily a game that where you would think, oh, the narrative is really important. The
I
narrative
see.
is really secondary. But because of the nature of the team and because of the way they approach narrative, I just knew that, oh, this is going to be really satisfying to work on because I'm going to get a chance to really do the best possible version of it. And I know they're going to support that part of the narrative, even though it's not, again, it's not, the game isn't driven by narrative. I mostly worked on my own and then kind of reported back in, but it was very satisfying. Uh, as opposed to you might get more money and be on a more prestigious title, but really you're there to like somebody else wants to be a writer but doesn't either have the time or the talent, and so they're looking over your shoulder the whole time saying, make the character do this. I want them to go here, and like, and often the end product is not very good. That's not satisfying at all. So
True.
I'm
True.
trying to
True.
stay away from those projects and work on the ones where I feel like there's a really high chance that it's going to feel really good to work on.
I see. Did you had projects that you had to say no to, by the way?
Well, sometimes, I mean, often what will happen is I will have nothing and I'm like desperately scrambling, right? Like, oh, I need a job. But then if you put feelers out to a whole bunch of people, uh, like two or three different people might come back to you at the same time. And so uh, in that case, it's really more a question of which one do you choose. And so that's happened to me a number of times. So there's three or four things in the offing, and I'll think like, okay, well, this one might be a longer term uh, project, but which is attractive in some ways. Um, and it might even pay a lot more money, but it's just like, oh, I know I'm not gonna get up in the morning and really want to work on it. Whereas this project over here, you know, it may have a lower rate or something, but it's going to be much more satisfying to work on. And so almost I try to always pick the ones that I think are going to be the most emotionally rewarding rather than say the most financially rewarding. But that said, if someone came along tomorrow and wanted to pay the moon for working on something, there's sometimes you make that sacrifice in order to gain some other goal, right? It gains me the freedom to then take a year off to write a book, for instance. Um, that also can happen from time to time.
I see. I see. I see. And how do you deal that when you have to make this sacrifice in your life?
Well, I think you just have to make it willingly, right? You just
I
have
see.
to know that, well, the reason I'm working on this
I
project,
see.
which I find annoying, is so I can do this other thing I really want to do, and sometimes it's not even that clear of a trade-off. So when I was producing movies, which I might do again too, but I haven't done for a couple of years, it's I live in British Columbia. In February, in 4 in the morning, it is cold and wet, or it's snowing or it's slushy, and I got three cranky people and some problem, and the electricity isn't working or whatever. Like it's not necessarily fun in the moment, uh, but I wanted to make movies. I wanted to write scripts that got made. The only way that I got my original scripts made was by being the producer of them.
I see.
So it's you accept the responsibility that comes with that and the all of the downside in order to be a produced screenwriter. The one leads to the other, and you just have to tell yourself, well, I'm doing this for that.
I see. I see. So going back to your younger age when you like really had this passion starting out for writing novels, were there any novels that you have written back then and you would like to pick up again and to like publish it?
No, I think I had ideas, lots of ideas for things, and I put
Okay.
some things down on paper, but boy, they were terrible. And
Really?
and I think you gotta, you know, there's the you have to appreciate the way you've evolved and realize that, okay, that idea maybe was not even um, like it was sort of flawed at its
I
core.
see. I see.
And the other thing is, I think, as I said before, I mean, I probably could list 20 different ideas that I would like to pursue now. So I'm not short of them. So going
I
back
see.
to the one I know didn't work very well is like the last thing I would want to do, I think.
I see. I see. And throughout your life, what was that click in your life when you really found your own style as a writer?
It really, I mean, it evolves over time.
I see.
So like
I see.
in the written fiction, I mean, I've written short stories and novels for ages, but really only in the last couple of years do I really think I found a voice that works for me. Whereas screenplays, I've probably written 20 or 25 screenplays, and of that, I probably get paid to write half of them. Uh, but most of them are written to some other voice because you're writing a sequel to a movie that's, like a movie I got paid to write that never came out was a sequel to a series called Hollow Man, which I think Sony was making, kind of the Invisible Man. The first one had Kevin Bacon, but
I
then it
see.
slowly got less celebrated actors as it went, to straight to video. Um, but I'm writing to suit them, so that it's not really my voice at all. It's just it's a work for hire where they want it a certain way, and you're just the trick is to match that. So I think I have a voice now for that was after that was after of working on it. So everything. Same with video games. Like I have a philosophy about many different to work on many different the underpinning.
I see. Okay. Okay. Thank you, by the way. Okay.
You're welcome.
Any more questions that you would like to ask from the chat? People speak up. Let me know. Hölgyek, urak? Bármilyen más kérdés? Any more questions? Okay, so I the question that might sound cliche, but what is the game story, and also what is your favorite name? Some of those three, if you could name so.
Sure.
You could also
Favorite
pick
video
more.
game. Right. It's interesting. So, for instance, game story I can think of from a straight quality perspective.
Okay.
I found that really satisfying. The playing of the game, I've always and so I would say they're my favorite as a group. Now I'm really enjoying that will change, but and I like the first two Baldur's Gates, the isometric. I really
Original ones,
enjoyed
yeah.
the originals. I thought, and then books is so hard. So many different types of books, right? So like Abercrombie's The Blade Itself, which is it's got a particular feel to it. Um, there's hundreds of different books that I loved, and I keep coming back to inspire my own writing is that called The Goblin Emperor, which is has a lot less violence and carnage in it, but the is really key, and it's just about a guy who's in way over his he makes a decision based on his internal compass the end, and you just love him for that. So, you know, hundreds of others. And movies, um,
Hard question, I know.
because I think there's so many, and how do you
True, true,
compare?
true,
Like
true,
I
true.
like
And I totally agree with you. Yeah.
yeah, movie I often come back to
Okay.
an Australian film from but I really like a lot of David Fincher. I think is great.
Yeah.
Seven, I think, is a work of genius, and so I don't watching Seven when I'm just having a glass of wine and want some light entertainment. Uh, it's just so gritty and kind of twisty. And on the other hand, I really love Aaron Sorkin's work, and so Moneyball is something that if I'm just looking for a touchstone to think about my own writing, I'll go back and watch a bunch of scenes from Moneyball because I just think it's beautifully well executed. I mean, it's a great story and the acting is really top notch, but it just the way the story is executed. I mean, it's a movie about baseball statistics, so in a way, it it's easier to make a great movie about a hero who fights a dragon and saves the kingdom. It's harder to make a really great dramatic movie about baseball statistics. So I sort of respect the challenge that they took on there.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for your time, by the way, and thank you
No
for
problem.
all of those people who watched us live. Like I said, I will need some of your more minutes, but for those who will be watching our interview as a VOD or an edited version of on YouTube, thank you for watching it, and thanks for everyone who asked questions. And yeah, I'm very honored that you joined us for today's show of mine. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks everyone. Bye bye. Have a great